The big story we are focusing this afternoon, President Cyril Ramaphosa has been testifying at the hearings of the South African Human Rights Commission's investigation into last year's unrest. Now, earlier, Ramaphosa says he never got any intelligence reports as it relates, to those unrests. Our senior reporter, Griselda Lewis, is joined by politics editor Mzwandile Mbeje. They are in Sandton. Griselda, a very good afternoon to you. Now, President Ramaphosa spoke to media immediately after testifying, saying, very pertinent things about how government really was caught unprepared around these unrests. Talk to us about what else his testimony had to say.
Well, a very good afternoon to you, Unati. President Cyril Ramaphosa indeed telling the July unrest hearings that the events as they manifested back in July were unforeseen. You're correct when you indicate so. He says it never surfaced in any of the reports, but there were indications of protests, but not at the scale of the kind of destruction that then unfolded. He says the only information he received related to protests by truck drivers, the MKMVA, as well as members who had been aggrieved by the impending incarceration of former President Jacob Zuma. President Ramaphosa said he is yet to see a report saying this is how the July unrest was going to unfold. So should they have known instead then? The president saying yes. There was a weakness there, conceding or acknowledging, or the president acknowledging that there are flaws in the security cluster. So there was also a weakness in coordination. The president conceded, saying that police did the best that they could within the weaknesses of the system. Another concession from the president about weaknesses in the system, and another admission that the structure itself was incapable of dealing with the violence that we saw. So when the president was asked about, what extent factionalism in his own party played, he was asked that here in the hearings, as well as after he had gone out and spoken to the media. He basically said that that was pointed out to by the expert panel report, as well as the Mufamadi reports into the violence. You'd recall that the president had basically said that factionalism in the ANC had an impact on a number of national issues, and he says those issues are currently being dealt with. You'd also recall one of the other critical issues in terms of the arrests as well, Unati, being made in the wake of the unrest. People who were said to have been involved in the unrest. The president says those individuals need to be brought to justice, and not doing so would be a gross injustice. So essentially that's what the president was alluding to. The president also saying that basically what happened in July was humiliating on so many fronts. South Africans subjected to unrest where, the visuals that we saw, Unati, people being thrown into stores where they were looking for food, which speaks to what the president says is the other underlying challenges. The president talking about a darkness during that time, watching in horror as the country was engulfed by violence. The president also indicating that had been a period of uncertainty, and there was also a feeling of betrayal that some people would go to that extent to try and destroy the country. I'm going to bring in now the political editor here at the SABC, Mzwandile Mbeje, who joins me this afternoon. Mzwandile, we've been listening to the president try to allay, I guess, the fears of South Africans that what happened in July would not happen again. Do you think he succeeded in doing that? That was one of the first questions I posed to him after we went out of the hearings this afternoon. Well,
thank you very much, Griselda. I think South Africans at this point in time want to see evidence and proof of things that are being said. Because when the country watched in horror and there was no action, they felt helpless. So yes, I think his actions of late, including yesterday's appointment, perhaps may point to the direction that, yes, he's acknowledging those weaknesses as he has done here, by starting to restructure certain elements which perhaps would then make it easier for him to and then say we are rebuilding. In fact, you also remind me of the question that was posed to him to say one of the Director Generals, actually the Director General in the Treasury, yes, Mr. Teno Mahajan, basically said this country is now having the elements of a failed state. He was quizzed about that. So looking at all those things that the system is not able to do. In fact, another question that was really, really difficult for him was when Commissioner Ntuli said, Mr. President, you've been in power as this government. This system you're talking about, you have acknowledged that it has failed, but you have not done anything about it. So that is really instructive in terms of what exactly is this government going to do to make sure that those things are done. But of course, he said they are rebuilding, and then he pointed out those examples of the new appointments that he's made.
What I found quite interesting was that, yes, there's the new appointment pertaining to the National Police Commissioner, Fani Masimula, and Commissioner Ntuli herself as well said it's almost a year. In fact, today is the 1st of April, May, June, July. In a couple of months' time, it will mark, a milestone since we saw this unrest take place. But there has been no one. If my memory serves me well, just the other day, one of the cases pertaining to one of the alleged instigators was thrown out of court. How much does that do to instill that kind of confidence? Yes, on the one hand, you have the appointment of a new police commissioner, but those believed to have been the masterminds behind this are still nowhere to be seen.
I think that's why I think the first question was South Africans will now need evidence. And you and I, we were reporting on this, we were told that there were 12 instigators. I still remember very vividly. We're still waiting. Who are those key investigators? Actually, that question was posed to the president. And then he basically said the investigations are going on. So he's hoping that justice will be done, because failing to bring people, those who did what they did, to book will be a great injustice. So clearly, yes, he has come here. He has admitted the weaknesses. I can tell you now that South Africans, given the experience and the length of time that has passed, they will believe what they hear, not only what they hear, but what they see, because evidence has shown that at some point there can be lapses.
Yeah. I think it's the conference in Mpumalanga that is sitting currently. I think my colleague, Samkele Maseko, is covering that, Ms. Wandile. Correct me if I'm wrong. But another aspect that was mentioned, Buang Jones, one of the evidence leaders, bringing up a critical aspect which cannot be divorced from these proceedings about to what extent factionalism within the governing party had played in what we had seen. An acknowledgement, while he said then he'd have to put on that other hat as ANC president, that some of those matters are being dealt with. That in fact, factionalism in his own party has also played a role in some of the national issues. Quite telling.
In fact, the fact that we had the July unrest was largely as a result of factionalism within his own organization, because there are those who feel the former president is being persecuted. And then those people from within the party, that's why you had people from the MKMVA going to Nkandla, for example, to camp there, because they felt that a great injustice was being done to one of their own and being done by the comrades. So clearly those events ended up unfolding and affecting the nation, as the genesis is the governing party because of factionalism. In fact, one of the things the former president said, former President Thabo Mbeki, as he's been addressing some of the provincial conferences, he said, we can't allow the ANC to fail, because if the ANC fails, the country will fail. So what does that mean in real terms? He basically says, if the ANC can't get its house in order, remember, it's the leader of society. Remember, it permeates just about every sector of society. So if those fissures then are deep and then they are irreconcilable, you are bound to have what you have had, something like July unrest. I mean, Mpumalanga conference, as we can see now, Mpumalanga conference that is sitting this weekend, clearly you would see, as I'm speaking to you now, Griselda, it's starting, there are members who decided to go to court. Why? It's because of factionalism. So if the party is not able to deal with that, it's going to be difficult for this country.
One of the other critical aspects, the sentiment that the president had shared in one of his addresses was that of ethnic mobilization. So he says at the time, reports that had come to him, I remember one of the words that he used, and he seemed to have felt very aggrieved by that, where one of them indicated basically this vendor man should move aside. So he says, subsequent to the time, reports had suggested that it was so, but majority of South Africans were not, or those who were protesting, were not doing so along racial lines.
Yeah. In fact, I think it was very interesting to listen to him explain how he, for example, reached that conclusion. But of course, he immediately, after more evidence came to the fore, disavowed all of that. He basically said, because he also, like all of us, follows everything, social media and all those things. Of course, there were those instances where people were throwing some tribal insults, perhaps even to him. And I think some of those perhaps felt a bit unfair, as he said. So, but I think what was interesting is that I think it was just a matter of a day, and then he said, you know what, it's been a miscalculation, because as a country, I think when, for example, the party he leads was formed, I think one of the founding statements was that Mzulu, Xhosa, Msuthu, Hlangana, so which basically means pull together, so forget about the demon of tribalism. So clearly, those were some of the issues, but it's good to see that the country seemed to have really gone over that, because I think as South Africa, we cannot afford to go back to any sort of divisions, be it racial or tribal.
The country stood in darkness, is what he said when he was giving his statement about, what happened back in July. So why do you think, following the president's, I mean, this is a culmination or coming together of everything that, or everyone, including ministers that testified at the hearing. Is it enough to inspire confidence in South Africans that, as president of the country, he was in charge?
Well, I guess for him to come and account will somehow give other people perhaps hope that at least there's something he's doing. But whether what he has said, people will believe it, that's something totally different. But, if we all say we are equal before the law, so it means everyone who must account for whatever, so must be able to do that. I think from that point of view, that it augurs well for the country. But of course, it's the content. Were they prepared? So did they do enough? Those are the key questions that South Africans would want to know.
Right, Ms. Wandile Mveche, a political editor here at the SABC. Thank you very much. Bringing to an end, of course, these hearings, a final testimony from the President of the Republic, hoping that, what the evidence that he gave would suffice in terms of whether a government had done enough. He himself admitting a number of concessions during his evidence that a lot more could have been done. Also indicating a number of concessions, also indicating that the police had done the best that they could at the time, despite the system, indicating, of course, to a system itself that is broken. Many questions that had been raised about the security cluster, whether they'd done enough, to the president himself indicating that certainly a lot more could have been done, and conceding that they were certainly caught with their pants down.
Our senior reporter, Criselda Lewis, there in conversation with politics editor Zwandile Mbeje. Thank you so much for that update. Of course, we are in discussion and in conversation around the final testimony by President Cyril Ramaphosa there at the hearings of the South African Human Rights Commission's investigation into last year's unrest. In fact, President Cyril Ramaphosa also saying that as the state, they affirm the responsibility to implement with haste the remedial and various corrective measures that are needed to make sure what happened in July 2021 does not happen again. Of course,